I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Chunky Satija is the Vice President at Everest Group, leading the healthcare and life sciences practice. He advises business and IT leaders of healthcare and life sciences enterprises, software vendors, service providers, and investors on a wide range of topics, including go-to-market strategy, vendor identification and prioritization, and market positioning. Nisarg Shah, Practice Director with the Information Technology Services team and manages Everest Group's life science IT outsourcing offerings. He focuses on advisory across the life sciences value chain and has a deep focus on advisory focused on clinical technology. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Chunky.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today, we are going to talk about decentralized clinical trials and how, as a sponsor, you can derive the maximum value from your decentralized clinical trial technology investments. Nisarg and I are going to be co-presenting today. Now, as an industry, life sciences industry has been doing decentralized clinical trials for more than a decade now. But we all know that adoption really picked up after the pandemic. From our research perspective, we've been looking at this area for the last few years, and we wanted to share our insights with you on what we have learned and how, as a sponsor, you can unlock value, and how, as a DCT provider, how you can provide the most value to your customers. We'll divide this session today in 4 sections. So we'll talk about our perspectives on the assessment on DCT platform providers. So we've done a couple of PEAK Matrix assessments on decentralized clinical trials product players. So we'll talk about what we have learned from those assessments. We'll also talk about, from a sponsor perspective, what are the preferences for a DCT solution. When sponsors look for a solution, what do they look for? We'll then talk about some of the emerging themes and how we expect decentralized clinical trials to evolve. And last, we'll have some time for Q&A. So let me, I think first, with any discussion on DCT, right, let me first start by how we define it, because I think any conversation I go to from a DCT perspective, I find that people have a different definition of what they call a DCT. So the definition that you see on this slide is our version of what we mean by a decentralized clinical trial solution. So as far as how we define it, we look at it both from a completely virtual trial, but we know that the vast majority of the trials would be hybrid. So from our perspective, a DCT is not only a trial which is completely siteless, but for the vast majority, this is going to be a hybrid trial. Then there are a few important components of what a decentralized clinical trial solution is. There are a few core modules, which you can call technology products. There are a few platform capabilities, and then there are a few enabling services. Now, if you think about the platforms, or if you think about the core modules or the technology products, these are, again, applications which sponsors were using even before the pandemic. Some of them, we saw a good amount of adoption, something like an eCOA or ePro, but there were others like eConsent where the technology existed, but we did not see a lot of adoption. And then there are other core modules as well. So trial participant recruitment, wearable technologies and BYOD integration, remote patient monitoring, adherence, televisits. So we believe that these make up the core modules of what a DCT solution is. Next are the platform capabilities. And I think this is one of the fundamental shifts we've seen in the last couple of years. Right? It's not just about a single product or a basket of products, but the preference really is moving towards more an end-to-end platform. And some of these platform capabilities, I'll read out some of them just in the interest of time. So one is unified data platform. I think this is one of the most important platform capabilities. And this is something that distinguishes a platform from a basket of different products. There's also site support and enablement, given that we are increasingly seeing site become an even more important stakeholder for running a successful decentralized clinical trial. Collaboration workflows for different stakeholders, making sure that you're able to collect real world data and also analyze it within the same platform. Some of the capabilities like DCT analytics, again, things that we don't see a high adoption right now, but as the industry matures, I'm sure we'll see more adoption. And there are a lot of other platform capabilities as well, right? From integration of devices to single sign-on, support for training, data security, scalability, as well as functionalities for engaging with the patients. And then there are a suite of enabling services because again, it's not a technology problem, and we believe that to tackle this holistically, you need a combination of services as well. So, and again, these services include home nursing, patient concierge, remote CRA, medical record reviews, and drug and device provisioning. So this is how we define decentralized clinical trials. So Nisar, question for you, given that again you've led a couple of PEAK Matrix assessments. What have you learned from these assessments, and also talk to the audience about what is it that we did, how we did, and some of your learnings.
Sure, Chunky. So we launched the inaugural assessment in 2021 and the follow-up assessment last year. Overall, there are a couple of interesting observations, right? We almost named the assessment virtual trials, PEAK Matrix assessment before focusing on the industry standard term of decentralized clinical trials. But you'll see that more and more this industry is getting very competitive. We intend to do a rerun of this assessment again, and it will have more providers than the ones you see on 2022 assessment. But I think some of the common themes which really panned out are, if you start with the aspirants, you'll see them focusing on very specific therapeutic areas, trying to build out a robust capability play in specific product segments, such as say an eCOA, an ePro, a televisit solution, right? So they may not necessarily have an end-to-end platform, but they do have robust capabilities in very specific therapeutic areas. If you contrast that to a major contender, right, you'll see most of them trying to orchestrate a DCTs across multiple therapeutic areas, and you'll also see that they're not only SaaS providers, they orchestrate a few partnerships for the pharma companies to run it holistically. And ultimately, if you look at the leaders, right, those are the providers who are offering a truly end-to-end platform, trying to orchestrate both the product as well as the services equation of a DCT. And they also have the experience of orchestrating trials across multiple therapeutic areas and running a larger DCT at scale. So those were some of the observations across both the assessments. And you'll see that there are broadly three kinds of providers you'll see on the assessment. One is, say, a DCT native provider whose sole focus is on DCTs. The second type of provider could be that who has a DCT suite of product along with the traditional clinical technology products such as an EDC, a CTMS, those kind of solutions. And the third category could be CROs who are also building a platform for running a DCT trial as well. So those were the three majority players who featured in the assessment, and we continue to see this platform landscape evolving. Say some who focus both on product and services themselves, some who partner for services and focus only on the product.
So Nisarg, having done this assessment a couple of times, one in 2021 and 2022, I'm curious if you saw any major differences between these two assessments. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the major differences that you saw?
Sure, of course. So I think there are a couple of differences. We saw the 2022 assessment bringing out a couple of nuances around the way DCT products were deployed, and I'll cover all of these points in detail. So the inaugural assessment, we were speaking to a lot of pharma sponsors who were thinking of deploying the DCT products in terms of a best of breed approach. However, a lot of this shifted focus in terms of an end-to-end platform adoption. So nearly 6 out of 10 pharma sponsors were thinking about it from a best of breed in 2021. But 6 out of 10 were then focusing on an end-to-end approach in 2022. And I think the reasons are, if you look at the benefits, it is just around, say, unified platform experience, lesser TCO or a total cost of operations, and smoother integration, right? So this was what we uncovered in terms of the way the products were deployed. If you look at the focus, 2021's focus was purely in terms of restarting post-clinical trials, offering some respite to patients who could not visit a site. So a lot of the focus was around patient centricity. But coming into 2022, we observed that sites and sponsors also became critical stakeholders for the success of a trial. We also realized that sites were one of the largely ignored stakeholders in the 2021 assessment, wherein they had to log in into multiple solutions or interfaces. They had a lot of struggle in terms of adopting these, upfront. So there was a lot of focus which went into improving the site interface, bringing in all those functionalities into the mix. In terms of partnerships, I think you covered in our in the scope, right? There are a couple of partnerships in terms of auxiliary services which we saw in 21, but if you look at 2022, the focus on partnerships was more holistic. So moving beyond auxiliary services into technology partnership, say a partnership with a hyperscaler such as an AWS and Azure, a partnership with a data provider who has, say, a lot of data points on how to improve a clinical trial or improve the way a protocol is being designed. In terms of KPIs or how pharma companies were looking at KPIs in 2021, we saw a lot of focus around patient recruitment metrics, patient adherence rates, but there was very little focus on data quality. And this is something which we saw an uptick in 2022. So how are you focusing on, say, the problem of plenty, say through data security, data analysis, and ultimately processing the data before it moves downstream to an EDC or a CTMS solution. And last but not the least, in terms of consulting, the 2021's focus was more around market education, thought leadership, focusing on a lot of webinars, right, in terms of educating the market in terms of why you need a DCT. But 2022, we saw a more holistic focus in terms of consulting where the DCT providers amped up their consulting portfolio. They helped the clients in terms of change management as well as implementing training modules for a lot of their DCT solutions, which practically was absent in the 2021 iteration.
Thanks, Nisar. Again, I concur with your findings. I think one of the things which I've recognized through a lot of my interactions is I think as an industry, how we've all recognized the importance of sites. As you mentioned, the focus previously was largely on patients, how we can improve experience for patients. But I think coming out of the 2022 assessments, one of the biggest ways in which I feel the industry has matured and how there's a recognition that it's not just the patients where they need to improve experience, but also other stakeholders, and sites are one of the most important stakeholders. So I think one of the things which is very interesting for me is given how fast the industry is evolving, I've often found a large degree of variance in feedback that I receive from a lot of sponsors on their experience of working with their DCT provider. So we wanted to look at this in a little bit more detail. So we did some analysis based on the data that we had. So from a 2021 perspective, we ended up speaking to 27 buyers. So again, these are reference customers of the DCT providers that you saw on the PEAK Matrix assessment. And we spoke to around 56 buyers in 2022. I think one of the things which was good to see is that satisfaction had in fact improved compared to 2021. And that is a good sign for a maturing industry, which means that, again, their buyers are now getting used to the solutions and the platforms that they're offering. Having said that, I still think it's lower than where we would want it to be. If you consider the fact that these were reference customers, and still more than a third of them were dissatisfied with their existing DCT provider, it still means that we have a long way to go. Now, the numbers are not surprising because, as I mentioned, it's a fast evolving industry. sponsors are getting more experience in what they expect from their DCT strategy, and as a result, what they expect from their DCT provider. So I think all things considered, it's good to see that the satisfaction levels are increasing. We also looked at, again, what are the main reasons for satisfaction and what are some of the main reasons for dissatisfaction. And there were a few common trends. So those buyers that were very satisfied noted a few reasons for their satisfaction. So one was focus on user experience. And again, we've seen this improve significantly from 2021 to 2022, making sure that the products are more intuitive. Advanced technology, again, more use of analytics, use of AI. I think we are seeing a lot of movement in that area as well. And generally better project management. I think these were the things that stood out amongst the buyers that were satisfied. The ones that were dissatisfied, again, there were also a few common reasons that they cited. One was, again, concerns around data quality. And again, Nisarg, you also mentioned this on the previous slide, right? That this is one of the things that we saw changing. So there's increased focus on data quality, and sponsors are looking at their DCT providers to help them with this. The other was auxiliary services. Now, again, I think sponsors acknowledge that they don't expect all of the product, the platform, the services, everything to be under one roof, but they do expect the DCT provider to orchestrate these services. So having partnerships for auxiliary services, partnerships with, again, data providers, with technology vendors, with system integrators. I think these are areas which sponsors expect from their DCT providers. And last is domain expertise. So understanding of the client context, understanding of the therapy area. So I think these are also things that sponsors expect from their DCT providers. So again, these are things that we have observed. We do have a poll, and we would like to hear from you on what do you think is the top reasons sponsors are dissatisfied with their DCT providers. So we'll have this poll open for the next 45 seconds. So Nisar, question for you. In your, I would say, last 3 conversations, what are some of the reasons that you've seen come up?
Yeah, and probably a spoiler alert, right? A lot of the crowd is also opting for elements such as confusion around operationalizing the UI UX, quality of data. I'll probably touch upon this in the next slide as well once we end the poll. But those were some of the reasons where a lot of sponsors voiced challenges around operationalizing DCTs.
Good. I think we have a few more seconds till we close the poll.
Yeah, I think the poll is closed, right? So no surprises. You'll see that the top 3 are, say, the confusion around operationalizing a DCT, followed by, say, the scalability issues with the DCT, and one item or one topic which is increasingly doing the rounds is diversity in clinical trials, right? So how do you onboard and recruit diverse patients in a clinical trial, especially decentralized clinical trial? So Chunky, in case you're able to go to the next page. So I'll quickly focus on the reasons for satisfaction. Most of it was covered by Chunky. Sponsors appreciate the fact that the solutions which are offered are modular in nature, in terms of you can easily switch on or switch off a capability you do not require. And thanks to an end-to-end platform, it becomes much easier. The UI UX is one area where we saw, say, only 5% of the population voting for it. And it is a testament to the fact that the DCT providers have done a lot in terms of enhancing the user interfaces from a patient-facing perspective, there's been a lot of experience by design elements incorporated into various solutions. And a lot of the sponsors are happy with those, the training as well as the experience which is offered by those solutions. Similarly, in terms of domain, so nobody voted for limited domain expertise because a lot of the DCT providers are, they're not a jack of all trades. They specialize in a specific therapeutic area before really scaling to other therapeutic areas as well. And therefore, they hire a lot of experts who can, customize or shape the applications tailored to a particular therapeutic area as well. In terms of technological maturity, right? So thinking about the right partnership, thinking about the kind of advanced analytics use cases to expose to the platform, and integration with the downstream applications. All of that is not often a challenge for a sponsor. And last but not the least, the integration with third-party applications. Usually, because these are all built as a SaaS product and they have a well-built API layer, they're able to integrate both downstream as well as upstream with, say, a wearable patient facing watch or an application. So all of those are issues which have been ironed out and sponsors don't face challenges with. But if I were to speak about the other side of the coin, right? The biggest issue is with respect to operationalizing a DCT. So why do you need a DCT in the first place? How to go about setting up a DCT, sourcing considerations for a DCT platform provider, as well as the auxiliary service ecosystem. All of those are answers which quite a few pharma companies are trying to get answers to. And this is where consulting as a business for a DCT provider becomes very important. Just not in terms of, say, getting involved from implementation, but right from ideation to helping them set up the business case as well. I think you covered the limited partnerships in auxiliary service ecosystem, right? There are nuances where, say, a pharma company will have to separately contract for a home nursing service contract, or say a patient concierge contract if it is not provided or through a partnership or in-house by a DCT provider. So having everything under one roof, either through partnership or in-house, is something which is viewed beneficial. Stakeholder coordination, delays in response, delays in support, delays in setting up the DCT product ecosystem is also one area where sponsors would like more flexibility, as well as fast a degree of quickness when it comes to deployment. Scalability, which I believe a lot of the crowd has also voted, is around going beyond phase 2 of a DCT into phase 3 when you're working with, say, thousands of patients across multiple geographies, not just, say, the US or the Europe, right? And last but not the least, I don't think the products are designed in such a way that a minority patient can utilize it from the get-go, because most of them may not have multilingual features. Most of them may not have capabilities to work in an environment which where there's a network bandwidth constraint. So these are all instances and nuances which the provider landscape needs to think about and constantly innovate in order to impress the DCT sponsors, if I may.
Thanks, Miss. Again, there's also a question on the chat that if sponsors are happy with DCT providers, why are DCT providers not doing well financially? I think this is, again, more complicated than simply the experience that sponsors are having, right? Obviously, that is one factor that comes into it. But again, there are other factors, the funding, the drying up of funding. So naturally, I think as a result of it, a lot of them are focusing on, again, what is core to them. So you would see a lot of layoffs. But again, I think from a buyer satisfaction perspective, we still continue to hear good things. But I think given the macro environment we are in, it obviously impacts the amount of funding some of these DCT vendors would be able to get. So I think it's more a reflection of that rather than the capabilities or the satisfaction that their sponsors are reporting. So I think let's move to the next section. So we'll talk about, again, based on these two assessments and based on speaking to a lot of sponsors, what are some of the preferences for a DCT solution? I think Nisarg started to touch on this, right? But I think one of the things that we were examining is how are buyers consuming these DCT solutions. If you think of the time before the pandemic, again, a lot of the DCT technologies that we talked about, so whether that's eCOA, ePro, eConsent, a lot of them have been around for more than a decade or more than some of them have been around for more than a decade. And the predominantly the buying pattern used to be best of breed solutions. I think after the pandemic, one of the things that we started, one of the areas where we saw the biggest change is the preference for best of breed versus an end-to-end solution. So when we did this assessment in 2021, around 63% of the buyers mentioned that they prefer best of breed solutions, and only 37 mentioned that they prefer end-to-end solutions. But when we repeated the assessment in 2022, this was one of the areas which saw significant change. So you would see on the right, 42% of the buyers in 2022 mentioned that they prefer best of breed solutions, whereas 58% mentioned that they prefer end-to-end solutions. And again, this is consistent with what we are seeing in the broader clinical development ecosystem as well. We are increasingly seeing sponsors trying to move away from the various point solutions that they have deployed across clinical, regulatory, safety, quality, to try to move towards a single platform. And I think that is the same phenomena we are seeing on the DCT side as well. I think another good thing that we saw in 2022 was we also saw deals moving away from a single study deal to an enterprise level deal. Again, these are still early days. I think when we repeat the assessment in 2023, we'll also look at what the consumption has been for those deals. But given that there are some large pharma which are willing to engage in some of these enterprise level deals, I think is a step in the right direction. We also looked at, again, from a buyer preference perspective, we also looked at when it comes to sourcing, what are the criteria that they use for selecting a DCT platform? So we asked buyers to rate a set of different parameters. And these are the results that you see. So their preferences in 2022 compared with preferences for sourcing criteria in 2021. Now the top criteria, I think, remains same. And as we also talked about this before, right? So ease of use for patients and other end users, I think that this was the top ranked sourcing criteria in 2021, and that remains the top sourcing criteria for 2022. There's some criteria, for example, scalability of the platform that has moved from the rank 3 to rank 4. And I think this is largely because, again, we've seen a lot of pharma organizations scale their DCT investments. We've also seen some enterprise level deals, and we've also generally seen pharma being more comfortable with adopting decentralized clinical trial technologies and then trying to scale it across their therapy areas and across the enterprise. So I think they've seen more proof points on that. There are some parameters or there's some criteria which have become more important in 2022 compared to 2021. So again, integration with variables and sensors has moved from rank 6 to rank 5. Again, just shows the importance of variables and how they've already become an important part of a clinical trial. And moving forward, we expect more trials, more decentralized clinical trials to use variables. Ease of customization is also something which is moved up in terms of sourcing criteria. Again, as in, we know that pharma as an industry, there's a heavy degree of customization. And this also makes its way to the sourcing criteria. So sponsors expect their DCT providers to customize their solutions. And the other parameter which has jumped from, again, rank 4 to rank 2 is preference for an end-to-end unified platform. And again, this speaks to the slide before, where increasingly we are seeing pharma organizations trying to move away from disparate best-of-breed solutions to an end-to-end platform. So, Nisar, given that, again, we've been looking at the space for some time, we've looked at the sourcing criteria. Generally, I think my sense is when we talk to sponsors, we still see a lot of confusion. So, what, again, from your perspective, what are some of the questions that you think sponsors, uh, what are some of the unaddressed questions that they have?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest question which they have is building the business case for an end-to-end deployment. A lot of the sponsors are unable to benchmark success because most of the end-to-end platform related, say, engagements have only been ongoing for the previous 1 or 2 years. And that too maybe for a specific therapeutic area or two. So how do they think about, say, benchmarking success with those limited business case studies and developing the roadmap for further end-to-end deployment? I think they are aware about the benefits. Uh, it's more about finalizing the short-term, the short-term benefits and the long-term benefits. They are also aware that in the short term, they may need to incur costs, but in the long term, there's more, value realization, more focus on patient experience. Some of these are more softer and lesser quantifiable benefits, which pharma companies also should be aware of. The second is with respect to coordinating among multiple stakeholders. So this is where, say, the patients, the site-facing personnel, the sponsors themselves, the regulators also get involved. If it is, say, a regional specific regulation such as Europe, then there needs to be compliance with the regulatory norms. But otherwise, a lot of sites may have their own preferences for certain DCT products as well. So in case there is going to be an end-to-end product deployment, how does that dynamic change, right? And ultimately, how is the deployment as well as the user training going to be conducted? So the coordination across multiple stakeholders increases and often is one of the considerations for a pharma company to solve for. The third one is with respect to interoperability. DC end-to-end DCT deployment is definitely simpler compared to, say, a best of breed approach because you're not integrating between an eCOA X versus, say, a teleconsent Y versus, say, a remote monitoring solution which is offered by another provider. But you still need to integrate with respect to the wearable technology and the traditional downstream clinical technology solutions which are in use, along with the data warehouse which the pharma company has deployed. So there is a lot of data plumbing as well as interoperability which comes into play, which a lot of pharma companies have to solve for. It can be through a DCT provider or bringing in a third-party system integrator into the equation. And last but not the least, in terms of, say, selecting the most appropriate site, often because of, say, the diversity conversation, the pharma company may also have to select a site which is, say, not amongst its most adopted sites. And in that situation, it may also boil down to, say, technology maturity not being as high as compared to the previous sites. So how do they go about this, equation, and how do they think about the best possible sites to serve, not just from a technology maturity perspective, a DCT platform adoption perspective, but also their ability to cater to a diverse patient population, not just within the US, but globally as well.
Thanks, Nisarg. So I think given that you've talked about some of these challenges, I think it would be good to hear audience perspective on these as well. So we have our second poll, and the question is, what is your top challenge in adopting and scaling DCT solution? So again, we'll keep this open for around 45 seconds. And again, we are starting to see some early results. So yeah, I think a couple of options that are receiving a lot of votes. So complicated regulatory landscape as well as integration between new platforms. Nisarg, what is your take on this?
Yeah, I think if I was to speak about it from a regulatory perspective, both the FDA as well as the EMA regulators have a positive stance towards DCT. Is just it gets slightly complicated if you're looking at specific geographies, say within Europe, within APAC, where you have to comply to state-specific regulations. So all of those have to be incorporated right into the product mix, as well as the way you're conducting the DCTs. Integration, I think this is one of the challenges which we see in the broader traditional clinical technology landscape. It is very difficult to integrate between an EDC solution, which is provided by one vendor, say, to a CTMS solution offered by another vendor. If you were to add a DCT solution, which is offered by some other vendor as well to the mix, integration becomes very complicated and is one of the trickiest challenges to solve for. And of course, then coordination, site readiness. Some of them may have their own preference for a solution versus another, is something which always needs to be considered. But I'm aligned with respect to the response I see on the poll as well.
Okay, I think there was some issue with the slide. So let me go back the slides. Yeah, I think the one response that surprised me. So I think I agree with the complicated regulatory landscape. I agree with the integration between new platforms. I would have expected site readiness to receive a little more votes than they have. And again, this is coming based on a lot of our recent conversations, Nisarg, where a lot of buyers indicated that this was one area that they're trying to address. So yeah, I think other than that, I'm in agreement with the results that I see. But yeah, I would say that at least from my interactions, the only thing which is I would rate slightly higher than what we are seeing on the screen would be site readiness. Okay. So let me move on. So again, just I think wanted to share with all the participants that as a complimentary offer for attending this webinar, we are giving you access or we are offering you a complimentary debrief on a couple of our latest reports. So one is our latest decentralized clinical trials platform assessment, and the other is the adoption playbook, again, which highlights how we see DCT being adopted, which therapy areas are adopted, which technology elements, which DCT technology elements are being adopted. And you would see the link for that in the chat. So if you're interested in a complimentary debrief, please use the link in the chat. So Nisarg, we talked about challenges. We also heard the audience's perspective on challenges. So the next question is, what should sponsors do to address those challenges?
Sure. So we came up with a 3-step framework in terms of ways to mitigate those challenges. It really starts with portfolio prioritization. Now, as a pharma company, you may have multiple therapeutic areas where you're running clinical trials. Not every clinical trial may need decentralization. Similarly, every therapeutic area may have a degree of decentralization associated with it. So, for example, most of the oncology trials are, in most cases, hybrid, whereas, say, a clinical trial which is focused on, say, dermatology or pediatric trials can be decentralized to a very large extent. So once you've figured out what is the degree of decentralization, what is the level of variables or remote monitoring products you need to incorporate into the mix, what is the level of complexity with respect to running your ECOA questionnaires, that is when you then move to the next step, which is around the sourcing criteria. So after the analysis, what we found is a lot of the pharma companies give priority to 3 key elements. One is the technology landscape or the technology maturity of a DCT provider. The other is innovation. What is the innovation focus? What is the long-term roadmap? They also look at the leadership profile of the DCT provider in terms of what is their stance on the DCT, the background which they are offering, or the background from which they come from, And last but not the least is the scalability perspective. So can the DCT provider, or does the DCT provider have experience running large studies, not just in the US, but globally as well? I think from a technology perspective, there are a few sub-parameters which a pharma company will definitely look at. I think Chunky, you covered UI, UX, but this is the biggest criteria from a technology maturity perspective. The other is also the platform capability in terms of, does it really have a unified data layer? How easily can it combine with the downstream applications, as well as with the wearable solution which is not generally in Apple Watch, right? So those are some of the top sourcing criteria which our pharma companies have. There will be nuances for an SMB pharma company as compared to a large pharma company. For example, a small and medium business might be more price sensitive as compared to a large pharma, where business casing references become more important. But largely, these are the top criteria we have seen for a lot of the pharma companies. And last but not the least is the organizational alignment. So how do you plan for user training, which is not just patient, but also the site adoption? Because at times the site maturity may be lower as compared to what you may imagine. How does the leadership walk the talk in terms of encouraging the sponsored leaders to continue adopting it and scaling it as they go along from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3? So this is what we outline in terms of the 3-step process, starting right from ideation to execution.
Thanks for laying out this framework, Nisarg. And I think from my experience, the first part of the framework that you mentioned, I think that is where sponsors need a lot of help. Again, I think in a lot of discussions with heads of clinical trial innovation, I think more in 2021 compared to 2022, I think they mentioned that one of the things that they struggle with is large number of requests that they get from the different study teams on wanting to incorporate decentralized clinical trial technology. So I think any help, I think that is one of the areas where I think they need a lot of help in helping them determine which are the trials which are fit for this, what decentralized clinical trial technology should they be using across those, because as you mentioned that there's a huge degree of variances from one therapy area to the other. So the solution or the prioritization would look very different from one therapy area compared to the other. So let's, I think, move on to the last section before we do the Q&A. So, Nisarg, you've been tracking this space for a while. You've talked about, in the past, again, you've talked about how the DCTs are evolving. And I know that you also have perspectives on how you expect it to evolve. So yeah, if you can just share those perspectives on how you're seeing this evolution and how you expect it to continue.
Yeah, sure. So, when we started researching this space, what really came out is some of the early solutions which were developed during the 2016 or the pre-pandemic timeframe. They were mostly digital solutions which had been developed to reduce paper-based processes or eliminate paper-based processes. And given that a lot of these solutions they did not have patient centricity by design. So you could see them as clunky solutions, or those which were often adopted in silos. And of course, when you talk about technology maturity, there was limited to no adoption of AI ML. But that is the era before the pandemic, right? Now, if you think about the DCT solutions, which you'll often see in the market, they're patient-centric DCT solutions, which means that a lot of focus has gone into understanding the patient psychology, designing the solutions in such a way that they are appealing as well as engaging to a patient, focusing on reducing integration complexities, say, between a wearable as well as a downstream clinical technology solution. You will see them adopting AI ML as well as advanced analytics to some extent. For example, some of the early use cases that most of the sponsors can expect to see is predicting patient dropout rates, using AI or facial recognition to recognize whether patient is adhering to the medication or not. These are still early days, but you'll see a lot of DCT providers focus on this, and I'll touch upon this shortly as well. But where I really see the DCT industry evolving or going to is building a stakeholder-centric solution, which really bridges the gap between research and care. So, being the best, not just in terms of patient centricity, but also site centricity. You'll notice that quite a few solutions, while they do a good job in terms of patient engagement, they still fall behind in terms of site engagement. Sites may often have to log into different user interfaces. They may have to keep a record of multiple databases as well. And all of this, it may not be unified from a site perspective. So trying to integrate everything from a stakeholder point of view, having a smoother user interface, which is multilingual in nature. So for example, if say tomorrow the sponsor wants to conduct a DCT for a minority patient population, it is very easy for them to port that user interface into a Spanish language or some other language as well. And ultimately, focusing on AI to give the maximum value. There are a plethora of use cases which can be deployed on a DCT interface or a DCT platform, but trying to make use of what is the most important one, which will derive the maximum value. Will it be, say, facial recognition based analysis? Will it be intelligent RBQM? Will it be voice-based capture of outcome reportings, etc.?
So, Nisar, I think you've already touched on some of this, right? So you talked about the evolution, where we are, where you need to get to. What do you think are some of the emerging trends that would help the industry move towards the top, right?
Yeah. So the first one will not come as a surprise. I think we have been harping on this fact for the past 45 minutes, but site experience cannot be an afterthought. They are your most important allies in terms of success of a DCT. So building a DCT, a site-facing DCT technology, which will help them automate tasks, focus more on patient-physician engagement, enabling clinical trial operations from a unified platform standpoint, and ultimately reducing the risk of, say, or reducing the challenges with respect to integrations, to data quality errors, and also data capture errors. So that is more about the site experience. The other is with respect to clinical trial as a care option for all. So it's not just the patient site and sponsors who are the stakeholders who will be involved in a DCT. You will see a lot more stakeholders come into the mix by, say, community groups. So leveraging community groups to build trust in the patient ecosystem, especially those who are the minority stakeholders or who will contribute to diverse patients being participating in a DCT. The other ecosystem is this pharmacy ecosystem, right? You'll see a lot of partnerships with respect to, say, the Walgreens or the CVS Health of the world, tapping into that data to really get into the patients who can really communicate or be a part of those DCTs in the future. And ultimately, the regulatory and the physician networks who can also improve the DCT process as a whole. The last but not the least, we all know about the potential of AI. It is still early days for a DCT. You will see a lot more focus in terms of, say, hyperscaler partnerships, data-specific partnerships for DCT providers to really iron this out. In fact, we really see a new category of providers in the space, which is really clinical data analytics platforms, those focused exclusively on the clinical trial ecosystem, who are really building out an AI, a menu list of AI use cases which can be deployed across both traditional, hybrid, as well as DCT trials, right? So how do those get integrated into the DCT equation is something which we'll be on the lookout for, and which will be an important theme to differentiate one DCT stakeholder versus another.
Thanks, Nisarg. As always, I think it's great to talk to you about DCT. So I think this brings us to the Q&A session. So yeah, if there are any questions, please feel free to add them on the Q&A chat. I think we have one question. So what are the practical considerations for DCT to be adopted for medical device trials? And any idea what are the use cases that are being adopted?
Yeah, I think in my conversations with a few medical device stakeholders, right, you'll see that deploying DCTs for a medical device clinical trial is more trickier than usual because a phase 2 or a phase 3 medical device trial often has very little patients. So the focus is more on the remote monitoring as compared to the patient facing interface. There are a couple of clinical trials on the medical device side, which we have seen more for the phase 2 medical devices. But we can confirm this and also respond to you once we have a better point of view.
Great. I think those were all the questions for now. Maybe I think we can wait for a minute or so to see if there are any other questions.
Yeah. We also received a few questions, offline as well. Maybe I can take up one or two of them meanwhile. So one of the questions which we also got was, the role of imaging AI insights in the DCT space. So so we definitely see an uptick in terms of imaging, especially for areas like dermatology or areas where you can definitely use a camera to capture specific portions of human body, analyze it in the backend, and then transmit the results in terms of a echo result back downstream. In terms of insights, there are various ways in which DCT sponsors or DCT providers will enable it. One is definitely through dashboards and reporting, which is the most common way, but also offering DCT sponsors a view in terms of where the clinical trial is, what is the patient reporting or the patient dropout rate for clinical trial, helping the sponsors look at what are the KPIs, how are they trending on those KPIs, and ultimately looking at the overall performance of the DCT from a timeline and cost perspective.
Thanks, Nisarg. And I think just a reminder to everyone, and as the slide says, you will receive an email with instructions for accessing today's presentation. But if you have any specific questions, do feel free to reach out to me or Nisarg. I think there's one more question. Maybe we can take that before we close. So how do you view the differences in the DCT technology needs for observational studies versus interventional clinical trials? And is the market adequately addressing these differences? So maybe I can start. So I think, yeah, from my experience, again, I think using some of these technologies for observational studies is obviously easier compared to interventional clinical trials. So again, I think largely when we've looked at adoption, we've, like, at least from a research perspective, we've largely looked at the use in interventional clinical trials, because I think even for some of the other observational studies, some of the remote data collection methods have been used even well before the pandemic. So I think the biggest difference that we are seeing is the use of these technologies in interventional clinical trials. So I think, again, if you look at a lot of the DCT providers, I think a lot of their solutions are currently more geared towards how they can help with interventional clinical trials. Because I think that is the biggest challenge. That is where sponsors need more help. Observational studies, I think they've been using some of these technologies like remote data collection for a longer time. There's another question. So, which are the leading DCT platforms? So again, I think like there are a couple of assessments that we have conducted on this. So again, based on the scope that we define, we identified Medable, Science 37, Thread, and Medidata as the leaders in the most recent DCT PEAK Matrix assessment. So again, I would recommend having a look at that. And I think as a part of the complimentary offer, that was also one of the reports that was called out. So if you would like to learn more, please do feel free to reach out to us. So I think given that we only have a few minutes left, and I think we have addressed the questions, I think there are, in addition to, again, the complimentary offer, there are a few more resources that you can use. And Nisarg, you've authored a lot of blogs in this area. So yeah, do you just want to provide a quick view of some of the work that we have done in terms of blogs and also reports?
Yeah, I think in terms of blogs, you'll see them, you'll see them hyperlinked here, but we focused a lot in terms of where are the DCT providers, where are the investments being focused on, what does a patient first design approach look like? So in case you're developing a DCT solution, it needs to be engaging, empathetic, it should enable reciprocity, etc., and more, right? So also when we were looking at the investments for DCT providers, we understood that there were a lot of investments going into the technology maturity, leadership hiring, focusing on market education for this pharma side of the equation. So you'll see these blogs as well as a couple more on our website where we focus exclusively on the DCT product landscape. I think in terms of the reports as well, right, Champi, if you go to the next slide, I can quickly cover that too. So we've done a couple of assessments on the DCT space, especially from a product perspective. We've also authored a couple of viewpoints focused on remote patient monitoring. What does an ideal roadmap for, say, integration as well as monitoring into the DCT look like? We did a DCT adoption playbook which looked at what is the level of adoption for, say, an eCOA, ePro, a televisit solution, an eConsent solution with respect to each of the across therapeutic areas. And we also looked at what are the top challenges and the sourcing criteria, most of which we've discussed, but that was what we focused on. We'll also continue to publish more on this space as we go forward. But yeah, Chanki, anything in terms of the content as well as our planned agenda for this year and the next?
Yeah, I think I will just echo what you mentioned. These are just a sample of some of the reports that we have published in this area, and there's going to be a lot more that we'll continue to publish. So yeah, if you're interested in talking about this, learning more about this area, please do feel free to reach out to us. And again, I'll thank everyone for taking out the time for attending this webinar.
Yep.
Thank you
Thanks,
too. Thank you.